no self, and waking up. These terms are based on the understanding that there's something fundamentally wrong with how you experience reality, and it's causing you a lot of needless suffering. If you're able to wake up and experience your life the way it really is, you can achieve a state of subjective tranquility and equanimity regardless of what's actually happening in your objective reality. This basically just means that you don't have to be stressed about being stressed, angry about being angry, scared about being scared. You realize that life is good no matter what happens. So this idea is actually a big deal, not just because equanimity is a cool word, but statistically, a lot of people are trying to figure this out. 1 in 4 people meditate, and many of those people go on retreats for days, weeks, years to try and figure out this concept. It's the basis for many religions, some cults, gurus, disciples, down to trying to cut through the illusion of the self, to wake up to your true self, luminous self, or no self. What the heck do these terms mean anyway? Some people talk about non-duality, which I'll get into in my second lesson, but to start out, I'd like to think of it more as true self rather than no self. Let's see if we can find your true self. Try and see if you can identify 4 different selves that make up who you are. These would be your thinking self, feeling self, experiencing self, and knowing self. The thinking self and feeling self are pretty self-explanatory. Most people think they go hand in hand, but actually they can be quite different. Your feeling self is the one that wants to stay up and watch Netflix. Your thinking self wants you to go to bed so you can get enough sleep. Then the next morning you wake up and your feeling self is upset at your thinking self for not going to bed on time. Next is your experiencing self, which is basically just your ability to hear, feel, smell, taste, touch. It's important to distinguish this from your thinking and feeling self because all of your experiences are actually neutral. Your heartbeat could go faster, but it's your feeling self that interprets that as being either excitement or stress. The experiencing self just feels the heartbeat. This part of yourself is often overlooked, and meditation can be a tool for tuning into your experiencing self. If you give it enough time, you'll find that it's actually quite enjoyable to pay attention to your raw experience. The last one is your knowing self. And this is part of you that's aware of the other 3. It's also the part of you that allows the other 3 to exist. Many times you think, feel, and experience things without actually being aware of them. For example, you can experience a great meal but be so distracted by the conversation or watching something on TV that you barely are aware of the food that you're eating. You experience breathing all the time, but you're rarely aware of it unless you make an effort to pay attention to it. Your feeling self might be a little bit irritated, but you might not realize it until you start being rude to someone, and then they ask you why you're in such a cranky mood. Your thinking self may be daydreaming even though you happen to be in the middle of a conversation, and retrospectively you're not quite sure if you were thinking or listening. This is all to say that your knowing self is the most important because it allows the other 3 to actually be part of your consciousness. If you're not aware of something, it's not really real from your experience point of view. And let me just take a moment to say that if you believe in a soul, awareness is where your soul lives. If you're not aware, you're either sleeping or you're dead. Most people who believe in a soul believe in there's an afterlife, and so in the hypothetical scenario where you don't become aware after you die, then you would say that there's no afterlife. So again, your consciousness is where your soul lives. So when you sit back and consider all these selves, you'll realize that the knowing self is the one that's most truly you, and the illusion is that you think you're most like one of the other selves. This is an illusion because all of your other selves are temporary. Your thoughts and feelings and experience are always changing from moment to moment, but your knowing self or your consciousness is always constant, and it's not contaminated or influenced by your other selves. The other 3 parts of you tend to be influenced by each other and eventually align together. So, for example, your experiencing self may feel your heart rate increase and your rush of energy, and then your feeling self will start to interpret that as anger based on the context. And then your thoughts will start to think of why you're angry and think of all the reasons that your anger is justified, which will trigger more physical responses, which will then reinforce the anger, and then it becomes a spiral where you get more and more angry. Now, while all this is going on, your knowing self is aware of all of it, but it doesn't take on the same quality as anger. It's just neutral. It's just aware. It's consciousness. And that's where all the benefits come from. That's how you're able to have equanimity, because you can identify as consciousness, as knowing, as attention, instead of identifying as a spiral of angry experiences, angry thoughts, angry feelings. You are not anger. You are the one who is aware of anger. Anger is just happening. And you can observe it in yourself the same way you can observe it in someone else. If you can do that, you're no longer controlled by your anger. You have the space to be aware of it, and then the ability to decide what you want to do with it. Do you want to let it go or use it as motivation to do something or say something needs to be done or said? Now, this is much easier said than done, which is why so many people struggle with this concept. But I would categorize waking up into 3 different levels. The first level is spontaneous waking up. This is where you're on a meditation retreat and you have deep concentration and you're able to spontaneously feel this centerless, selfless awareness. And then there's sustainable waking up, which is where you experience this identification with consciousness all the time. I've heard this described as working off a new operating system for your brain. This sustainable waking up is when you reach nirvana, Buddhahood, arhatship, or whatever name you want to call it. And if this is even possible, it would require a lot of meditation retreats like I described earlier. But I believe that there's a third or middle level of waking up that I would call it on-demand waking up. This is just where at any point during your day when you remember to identify with your knowing self or your consciousness, then you're able to cut through whatever thought or emotion seems to be taking you over at the moment. And this really can be like a superpower for your emotions and your well-being. So in order to tap into this on-demand waking up, centerless awareness, it takes a little bit more than just understanding the concept. You really have to feel it as part of your experience. So I'll try and describe how I do that, and if it doesn't work out for you right now, trust me, if you keep trying, you'll get there. But it may be helpful to do a little meditation, maybe try and download the Waking Up app by Sam Harris, or the 10% Happier app by Dan Harris, or look up the website by Locke Kelly. Those are all good resources to help you really get into this identifying with consciousness thing. But I'll give it a shot first to see if this makes sense to you. So one of the concepts to consider is that even though it feels like your consciousness is within your head, somewhere behind your eyes, the reality of your experience is that it's actually the reverse. So your consciousness is not in your head, but the feeling of having a head is actually within your consciousness. So let me say that again. Consciousness is not in your head. The feeling of having a head is within your consciousness. Another way of saying that is just everything you think, feel, or experience is within your consciousness. Another technique that some people find helpful is the fact that most of your conscious experience exists without being able to see your head. So your head is nowhere within your visual field. Some people even picture not having a head. And although this hasn't really done much for me in regards to identifying with consciousness, it's something that I've heard other people has worked for them, and so I thought I'd mention it here. The last technique I'll go through, which is one of my favorites, is to sit in a chair and imagine you're sending out your awareness to the corner of a room, and then having that awareness turn around and look back at you and look for the one who is aware. So you're turning awareness on itself. And then you ask yourself the question, do I know awareness or do I know from awareness? And the answer is that you know from awareness, which again is just a different way of saying awareness is all there is. So again, the exercise is to sit in a chair, send your awareness out into the corner of the room, turn it back on itself, and try and look for the one who's being aware, and ask yourself the question, do I know awareness or do I know from awareness? So once you try these exercises and you start to get the concept, the last thing to do is just to rest as awareness. So you're just sitting back and observing, knowing, and being aware. But you're not literally sitting back. Your mind is just at ease. You can have your mind at ease while doing a very strenuous activity, and it feels a little bit like being in the zone. If you ever played a sport or played an instrument, you may have gotten this experience of being in the zone. And this term tends to be associated with doing something that's very complex, like playing an instrument or playing a sport, but doing it in a way that seems effortless, not only for the person doing it, but for the people watching it. And if you can identify with consciousness, it gives you the ability to get in the zone no matter what you're doing and be able to get there on demand. Another way this can feel when you get into it is kind of like you're watching a movie from the third person point of view, which watching a movie is pretty enjoyable for most people. So it's actually pretty enjoyable to be able to view your experience kind of like a movie where your words are dialogue, your thoughts are narration, your memories are flashbacks, and your feelings are like some kind of futuristic haptic feedback where you're so tuned in with the main character that you're feeling what they're feeling. And this exercise can be used to help understand the idea of equanimity, because when you're watching a movie, you can observe the main character being extremely sad or angry or fearful, but the person watching is not quite as affected by those emotions. They're just watching them and having compassion for the character. So after all this, if light bulbs aren't going off in your head right now, where you're starting to get this consciousness, knowing, awareness feeling, then you might just try and pretend like you're in a movie or that this is all a dream, and see if that helps you get some of these on-demand, no-self, waking up benefits. You could also try to look into those resources I mentioned earlier. So to recap the benefits here, the end of psychological suffering, equanimity, tranquility, compassion, getting in the zone on demand, responding instead of reacting, and it's fun to do. So it seems like it's worth a shot to me, but let me know if it works out for you, or if you have any questions in the comments. If you like this video, you can give it a thumbs up, subscribe if you want to hear more videos like this,